Hey kids, so Mr. Piazza here. We're looking at objectives 2.233, fractions, decimals, and percents, which is all of standard 7 NS 1.3, another key standard for the CST. In order to reteach this, I'm going to basically use a graphic organizer that we used in class before to think about how we go from a simplified fraction to a decimal and backwards, to a percent and back, and to a fraction out of 100 and back. I'm going to start with a more complicated fraction than you're going to try next, which would be 7/8. In order to go first from the simplified fraction to the decimal, I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator. And I'll do that work over here. I have 7 divided by 8. Remember, the numerator goes inside the house. And so 8 goes into 7 0 times. So just subtract. Bring down the 7. Bring up the decimal like we saw in the last video. So our answer is going to be a decimal. 8 goes into 70 8 times. So 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, I have 6. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 8 goes into 67 times. 8 times 7 is 56. I subtract, that's 4. Bring down my last 0. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. I subtract and I'm done. So as a decimal, it's probably the longest step. If you divide the numerator by the denominator, we get a decimal of 0 and 875 thousandths. In order to go back from the decimal to the simplified fraction, what I'm basically going to do is turn this decimal, 875 thousandths, to a fraction and then simplify. If I had 875 thousandths, listen to the way that I said it, 875 thousandths, I just need to turn it into a fraction, which would be 875 thousandths. If I simplified that fraction, it would take me several steps to do it if I didn't know what the greatest common factor was. I would be able to simplify this fraction to 7/8. So, in a sentence, to go from the decimal to the simplified fraction, the very first thing I said, or did, was say 875 thousandths, and second, simplify. Next step is to figure out how we go from this decimal to the percent. Very simply, to go from any decimal to a percent, all we really need to do is multiply by 100. So if I have 875 thousandths and I multiply by 100, a trick we learned was basically that just moves the decimal 2 places to the right, because it has 2 zeros. So if we do that as a percent, 875 thousandths is the same thing as 87.5%. To go backwards, since we multiplied to go from the decimal to the percent, to go from the percent to the decimal, we're going to divide by 100. And if you divide 87.5% and divide it by 100, that'd be the same thing as moving the decimal 2 places, this time to the left, which would get you back to where we started at 875 thousandths. So at this point, we've gone from the simplified fraction to the decimal to the percent. Next step is to figure out how we go from this percent to a fraction out of 100. Pretty simple if you know that the meaning of percent means per cent, think of like a penny, per 100. So if I have per 100, 87.5% is really 87.5 over 100. That's our answer. All you need to know is the meaning of percent as per 100, and you're able to turn that percent to a fraction out of 100. Same thing to go backwards. If I know that 87.5 per 100 is the fraction, since I know that percent means per 100, to get back, all I really need to do is turn it into a percent. And that gets me back to 87.5%. There's not really a step there, it's just something you need to know. how we get from this fraction out of 100 to a simplified fraction of 77/8. And the bottom line is if you take this fraction, 87.5 over 100, and simplify, it would get you to 7/8. If you then wanted to get from 7/8 to this fraction out of 100, what you would need to do is figure out how you get a denominator of 100. So if I start with 7/8, what do I need to multiply both by to get this fraction out of 100? Well, if you divide 100 by 8, it's going to get you 12.5. It's just a valuable piece of information. So if I multiply 8 times 12.5, it gets me 100. And if I multiply 7 times 12.5, it'll get me 87.5 over 100. And so to get from that fraction out of 100 to a simplified fraction, we just simplify. To get from that simplified fraction to this fraction out of 100, we just need to figure out what do we need to multiply to get with a denominator of 100. This is a pretty complicated example because there's a lot of decimals involved. Some of the other fractions you'll see will not be so complicated. Okay, on your paper I'd like you to try this problem, converting 3/5 to a decimal, a percent, and a fraction out of 100. Please stop the video here, try the conversions always, and then press play when you're ready. Okay, you've tried to convert this fraction to a decimal, percent, fraction out of 100. If you converted 3/5 to a decimal, what you would have done is done 3 divided by 5. And that would have gotten you 0 and 6/10. To go from that decimal to percent, you just needed to multiply 100, which would have gotten you 60%. To go from 60% to a fraction out of 100, you just needed to know that that's really the same thing as 60 over 100. And to go from a fraction over 100 to the simplified fraction, all you need to do was simplify, which would have gotten you 3/5 all the way around. If you wanted to go the other way around, to go from 3/5 to 60 over 100, you needed to figure out what did you need to multiply by to get 100. Well, it would have been 20. 5 times 20 was 100. So 3 times 20 is 60 over 100 to get back. To get from 60 over 100 to 60%, you just need to know that that's how you write a percent, is 60 over 100. To get from 60% to 6/10, you just needed to this time divide by 100, you would have gotten 6/10. And to get from 6/10 to 3/5, the first thing was to say 6/10 is 6/10. And then second, to simplify. I'll just write simple. This simplifies to 3/5. And you're back to where you started. A pretty simple example going all these different directions. We're going to do one more that's a little bit more complicated before we get to independent practice. Please, on your paper, create a graphic organizer like this and simplify. This will be your last one. 1/8. Turn it to a decimal, a percent, a fraction out of 100. Stop the video here and press play once you've tried it and are ready to check your answer. Okay, you've tried it yourself, it's time to check. Simplified fraction to a decimal, the first thing you did is divided 1 divided by 8. It should have gotten you 0.125 or 125 thousandths. To go from that decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100, which is the same as moving the decimal 2 places, and would have gotten you 12.5%. To go from the percent to a fraction out of 100, you just need to know that 12.5% is really the same thing as 12.5 over 100. And to go from 12.5 over 100 to a simplified fraction, you just need to simplify. So you divide 12.5 over 100, and you divide the numerator by 12.5, and the denominator by 12.5. 12 divided by 12 is 1. 100 divided by 12.5 is 8. And you are back to 1/8. So you made the whole way around clockwise. To go counterclockwise, that's what we'll do next. 1/8 to go to a fraction out of 100, just the same idea but backwards. You need to multiply times something to get it over 100. That thing would have been 12.5. 12.5. 8 times 12.5 is 100. 1 times 12.5 is 12.5 over 100, which is how we got here. To go from 12.5 to 100, you just need to know that that's how you write it as a percent. To go from 12.5% to a decimal, you need to divide by 100, which is the same as moving the decimal 2 places to the right. That's 125 thousandths. And to go from the decimal to the simplified fraction, first is to say it. 125 thousandths is 125 thousandths. And then second is to simplify. If you simplify this, it would simplify to 1/8. And we're back to where we started. At this point, you've completed a fairly simple and then a fairly complicated example of turning a fraction to a decimal to a percent to a fraction out of 100. Now it's time for independent practice. Please convert each of these fractions to decimals, then each of these fractions to a percent, each of these percents to a decimal, and each of these percents to a simplified fraction. If you complete these problems and do well enough, you should be ready to retake objective assessment 2A.2 through 3. Good luck.